Brian Nichols, you're a great man with some great ideas, a great podcast.
Do you see why he's my favorite libertarian people?
Yes.
He's full of common sense and wisdom.
Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show.
Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show, your source for common sense politics on the We Are Libertarians Network.
Today I am joined by easily one of the best, Matt Kitty. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Hey, Brian, it's good to be with you. By the way, let me take a step back and say I love what you're doing. I love the conversational style, and it's a combination of good fun and serious ideas. I love the fact that your show's doing what it does, and this is how we win the future.
The Brian Nichols Show is the fastest growing liberty podcast that brings together people from all means of political thought as we seek to have meaningful conversations about the issues you care about.
There's so many things that we can do to make America freer and the world better and safer and more peaceful. Everybody has the responsibility of trying to help to do that. You know, what you're doing with your podcast is a perfect example of, you're doing this as a labor of love and for the cause, and that is exactly what we have to have.
At The Brian Nichols Show, our goal is to leave the audience educated, enlightened, and informed. And now your host, Brian Nichols.
Welcome back, you awesome, phenomenal, just incredible audience. I am so appreciative for you joining me again today on The Brian Nichols Show. And boy, oh boy, you guys are in store for another fun-filled episode, of course. A great guest, and all of you should know who she is, Dr. Mary Ruwart. I am so excited for you guys to listen to today's episode. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with Dr. Ruwart. If not, you are going to be in for a treat to learn about one of the best libertarian activists that we've had. So with that, I'm just going to cut right to the chase. Enjoy today's episode, share today's episode, and without further ado, on to the show, Mary Ruwart here on The Brian Nichols Show.
Oh, well, thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here, and I must say, it's kind of surreal being able to talk to you. I'm a very big fanboy, so I'm very excited to have the opportunity to have you on my show, and I think it's great because now my audience gets to meet who you are as well, and I'm sure many of them know who you are, but there's a few folks on my show who they're coming more from the conservative camp and even some from the left, and they might not be familiar with your story. So one thing about my show that I like to do is for my audience to get to learn how my guests got to where they are today. So if you could, Mary, give us kind of the Wikipedia page, if you will, of your story. So starting out, I know you obviously had the doctor next to your name. That's a nice little thing to have there. So maybe you can talk to your education and then your professional career and then obviously where you are today in politics.
Okay, well, it's kind of a blend, actually, Brian. When I went to Michigan State for my bachelor's degree in biochemistry, I was very quickly introduced to the writings of Ayn Rand by friends of mine. And, I thought for the most part they were very good, but I had one problem with them. I think I was kind of a closet liberal. And that problem was I thought we should be helping the poor. And part of that came from 11 years of Catholic education. I wasn't a practicing Catholic at that time, but I think what I took with me from that was that loving your neighbor was a practical thing to do. And so I felt it was loving to help people and that we should be doing it. But then I realized that if you put a gun to someone's head and force them to donate to charity or help people out, that was a lot less loving than if that person just was selfish and kept all their money to themselves. And so once I had that realization, I was really on board with the libertarian philosophy. And after getting my bachelor's degree, I went on and got a PhD in biophysics, also from Michigan State. And then I went to St. Louis University for my postdoctoral work. I was an instructor of surgery. I was working on animal surgery, I should mention, because I'm not an MD. I was working with transplant surgeons who had MDs, so we kind of played off each other, and eventually I became an assistant professor of surgery at St. Louis University Medical School. Then I was hired by the Upjohn Company to work in their prostaglandin division. Many of your listeners might know these compounds, these natural compounds, as eicosanoids today. And that's why you take fish oil, because you want to have good eicosanoids
So that's why we do it.
Bad one.
Okay, see, I'm very much into fitness, and obviously fish oil for the omega-3s is a lot of the reasons that people in fitness would take it. So it's interesting to hear about that.
Yes, the omega-3s are the building blocks of the good, what we call the good eicosanoids. And we only call them good because our diet has been so depleted of them that unless we take them separately, generally we don't get anywhere near enough of them. And of course, as you probably know, if you don't get enough of them, you have a lot of what we call silent inflammation, which causes all kinds of problems. So anyhow, that's what I was working on scientifically, at least at first. And at the time I came to the Upjohn Company, I also started being active in the Libertarian Party because I found that there was a group there. And I had never seen, a party group before. So I started running for office and getting acquainted with the principles of liberty. And at that time, I was reading about our foreign policy and seeing how it usually backfired. And all of a sudden, a lot of things came together in what I sometimes refer to as a revelation for lack of anything better to call it. All of a sudden I had a knowing of that the Christian philosophy of loving your neighbor, the economic principles of libertarianism, the idea that the ends and means are intimately related, and the idea that what is moral then is what is practical as well, kind of all came together for me. And it really enhanced my understanding of how potent the libertarian philosophy is and how wonderful it is, and how if we don't blow ourselves up, we will probably one day have a libertarian world, simply because the philosophy really is something that we need in order to achieve what we want to achieve, which is not just universal harmony and abundance, although that's a biggie, but also our personal happiness is based on not judging people, being tolerant, and not trying to aggress against them. Because once we do that, we create separation between us and them. And create that, we have some problems. And the reason I say that is when I had a chance to talk to someone who did a lot of propaganda for the government and basically telling people that these things that were against their best interests were actually good for them, obviously lying to them, defrauding them. I had a chance to talk to this gentleman, and I realized he wasn't happy. So I asked him, what are your goals in life? And he said, power and money. At first, I was taken aback. Who says that, right? But he had lots of power and money, so I realized I hadn't framed my question properly. So I said, well, what do you think it would take to make you happy? And he said, and it took me years to really understand this. He said, well, I think I need to feel connected to humankind in order to be happy. And I'm not. I feel very disconnected. And of course you would, right? Because if you are always trying to defraud people, you have to first separate yourself, at least mentally, from them. Because, if you love them as yourself, so to speak, you would defraud them, right?
Right.
The impression I had from some of the things that he said was he even defrauded his own family. And so obviously he had separated himself from just about everybody. So it's no wonder that he felt this lack in his life. So I've given you kind of an abbreviated version of the different aspects that form what I call the diamond of liberty. It's not just about economics. It's about a whole range of our humanity. And once it's recognized, I doubt we'll want to aggress against others because we harm ourselves by doing so.
Absolutely. It goes to really the namesake of Matt Kibbe's book, Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff. I think we can really encapsulate pretty much our entire philosophy into that message. And it's so easy that, even kids can understand what it means. And to hear your kind of aha moment where, it kind of that moment, it's like the light switch flips on. It's like, that it just makes sense. I know for myself, my real aha moment was in 2012 watching the candidacy of Mitt Romney versus Obama and thinking, because at the time I look back and I consider myself now a reformed Republican, was saying, well, if we only run a more socially accepting and a more liberty embracing candidate, we would have won. And then I realized, well, that candidate existed. It's just that they didn't get on the debate stage because they were a threat to the two major parties, and that was in someone like Dr. Paul. So that was really it's time to start looking at alternatives. And obviously I found my way towards the libertarians. And for you, I guess, when was it for you that you started to really get more involved in your libertarian politics?
Well, I was convinced in undergrad school, as I talked about, but it was probably in the early 80s that I got involved actually in the party. I think I had joined it before then from an ad in Reason magazine, but never heard back. So I didn't know where any of the local parties were until the early 80s. And once I found that, I was active ever since.
Gotcha. And obviously you were very well known in libertarian circles for your campaign for the 1984 presidential nomination for the Libertarian Party. Could you speak to maybe your experience there running as a libertarian and what the response was to, number one, I guess the Libertarian Party in general having you going for the party's nomination, but then also by and large in the larger political sphere, what the response was to your seeking the nomination?
Sure. Well, I felt as if, because I was young and naive, I felt as if we would get more publicity if we ran a woman at the top of our ticket. I didn't realize there was kind of a media blackout going on. So I wanted to suggest that, not for 1984, but for 1988, because I realized that we had some top contenders going into the convention, which was actually held in 83, and felt like, we should be thinking ahead. And I discussed this idea with Roger Gary of the Texas Party at the Texas LP state reception that they had. And he said, well, the only way anyone's going to hear you in this convention is if you run for president. So I said, okay, I can do that. I mean, I didn't expect to win, but we went out and made some flyers and I started talking. And I think people felt that maybe it was in 1984 that we should be running a woman. And since I was there, I got a lot of support. And this was my first convention, my first national convention. And I was kind of appalled in many ways because, here we were trying to change the world. And instead of acting as a team, we were very divisive. People were calling each other names and threatening to leave the party. And,
wow.
You would think that these
things
people
really haven't changed, have they?
So Roger and I decided that I would run for president and he would help me. And we actually had a lot of people get excited about having a woman at the top of the ticket in 84. So I had about 20% of the vote, and the two top runners each had 40%. And so both were courting my votes. And I learned that we really didn't treat each other very well. We broke promises to each other, in addition to calling each other names and threatening to leave. And at that time, once Berglund got the nomination, Ravenel stomped off and never came back again. And, this is sad because we're not going to be able to do anything if we can't work as a team. So Roger and I ran unity campaigns after that. And when Ron Paul got the nomination, he joked that, that his opponent, Russell Means, had gotten more applause than he did. and I thought that was a good ending because, or at least maybe a good new start, I should say, because it indicated that we had changed the way we treat those who don't get the nomination. Instead of driving them away, we were thanking them for their service. And that's, I think, a much more beneficial thing for us to be doing.
It's kind of fascinating because you look at the Libertarian Party, here we are in 2019, and it sounds like, honestly, we're experiencing a lot of the same problems that the Libertarian Party is facing back in 1984. I mean, is there something inherently about the libertarian philosophy that leads to a lot of this infighting? Is it the individual personalities, or what do you think is causing this nonstop libertarian infighting?
Well, I think it was resurrected in 2008 when we started bringing in a lot of candidates from the other parties, because the Republicans and Democrats do play dirty pool, if you will, much more than libertarians do. So that's a factor. And of course, I think Ayn Rand, as much as I admire her, was of the mind that one should judge and be prepared to be judged. I find that to be a philosophy that is very divisive. Libertarianism is a philosophy of tolerance. We tolerate the behaviors of others that we don't agree with, as long as they aren't initiating force, fraud, or theft against others. So tolerance is very important. And yet, when someone disagrees with us in the liberty movement, there's a tendency to really be quite negative towards them, call them names, and really do things that make it very difficult to work as a team. And so I think those two factors have united in recent times to make things difficult.
It's kind of sad because it just seems like we have such a strong moral case to make our argument on the grand stage. And I think if more people heard what we had to say, then a lot of them would agree with the ideas of personal liberty, economic freedom, personal responsibility, and they would join on in terms of saying, hey, I can be a part of this. But then they see what the infighting looks like and they get scared away, and then we are relegated to third place, it seems like, seemingly forever. So I mean, maybe I can ask you this now that you're kind of looking from the outside in, saying, what can we do different? What can the Libertarian Party, if you had a magic wand to the LP, would you do to make things right so we, number one, can actually be a unified party going forward, but then number two, to actually appeal to more people beyond our traditional libertarian spheres of influence?
Well, I'm a big one for rolling back big government without electing anyone. I think that the idea that we have to win elections, while it would be wonderful, is not very realistic at this point in time. And I say that even Ron Paul, who served in Congress and, of course, is a libertarian, at least philosophically, had a very difficult time accomplishing things other than being a whistleblower, because, of course, he was one person. And even though he tried to put together a Liberty Caucus, which was a great thing, it was still small. So even if we manage to get people elected, we have to get a large number of people elected to make a difference, whereas we are extremely good at rolling back big government without electing anyone. One of the things that was happening in the early 80s and 90s was that libertarian party groups were countering big taxation increases and land grabs by the government. I can tell a story about that.
Yeah, please do.
Yes. My first run as a libertarian, other than the National Convention, which we just talked about, was shortly after that, when I ran for city commission, which was supposed to be a nonpartisan office. And we had a whole slate of people running from the LP, because that's how you ran for those particular positions, unless you already had them. And so we ran as the taxpayers' protection slate, because we were trying to lower property taxes. And the opposition, the establishment party, the ones who were elected, I say party, but again, it's a nonpartisan thing, but the ones who were elected already figured that the way they could, make us look unattractive would be to tell people that we were libertarians. Nobody knew what libertarians were back then. So we had to explain what libertarianism was all about, which is what we intended to do anyway. And when we did that, people were all excited because, they liked the idea, that taxation might be theft. They liked the idea, that we were trying to lower property taxes because many elderly people especially had paid off their houses and now were paying property taxes that were higher every month than their mortgage payments had been. Yeah, so they had to move after saving up for this house so they could live in it forever. So a lot of people liked this, and we had been at the city commissions and spoken quite a bit. So people knew who we were, and they knew we were helping them out. And actually, we did quite well as a slate. We came in second. There were 4 slates. Obviously, the establishment people won again. But what happened after that was what was really impressive, because the city government was trying to use eminent domain to collect a lot of property and to do a very extensive rail consolidation project. They wanted to route all the trains in overpasses over Little Kalamazoo, Michigan. And it was going to be the biggest bond issue we had ever had. It would raise our taxes substantially over the next 30 years. And so a couple of us went to the meeting that some citizens had put together to fight rail consolidation. And even before the meeting got started, an elderly gentleman came up to me and put $200 in cash in my hand. And he said, "Dr. Ruwart, I know you work for Upjohn, and I know Upjohn's going to get a lot of land from this eminent domain." That was the payoff to have them keep their mouths shut. He said, but I know you're on my side, Dr. Ruwart, because you are a libertarian. And so take this money, please, and fight, because they're trying to take the bicycle shop that my brother and I have built up over all these years. They're trying to take it away from us by eminent domain. And the Libertarian Party, as well as other people who felt this was a bad idea, fought the rail consolidation and won. Now, there's several really big messages here. One is that as libertarians, we talked about our philosophy and our allegiance to it so well that people trusted us enough to give us money before we even committed to their cause.
That's a good point.
And the other thing is, we really stopped a big government land grab and taxation without electing anyone. So even though we weren't elected, we actually were very effective. And had we run next time, which we did not, I'm pretty sure 1 or 2 of us would have been elected.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So you see, the way to go about it is to roll back big government without electing anyone. And ironically enough, that's probably the best election tool you can have.
There's a fun expression. It's history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And I think we're even seeing that right now with a lot of the innovations that are taking place, especially in the technology sector. So think, for example, 10 years ago, Uber was never a thing, but with the advancement of technology, now the free market has been able to bypass government regulations through the use of technology and creating ride-sharing applications, or, for example, looking at like the blockchain technology and the cryptocurrencies, and that we've seen technology constantly being, 1, 2, now it's like 5, 10 steps ahead of government. And as a libertarian, it's very exciting, because I think we're going to get to a point where technology is so far advanced that government can't keep up, and therefore it makes it essentially obsolete. You look at any millennial nowadays, and they go and they look online for many different options before they make a decision, whereas that's not how it used to be 10, 15, even, we'll say 20, 30 years ago. So for me, I know I'm excited about it, because I think we're going to get to a point where people start to realize, hey, maybe I really don't need this government to keep things in order. The idea of this natural state of order that comes up, it really does exist, and we're seeing it happen before us with the free market creating this ebb and flow of regulation through the market itself, and supply and demand, creating the booms and busts in various industries. So I know, again, for one, I'm very excited. What are your prospects of the advance in this technology, and maybe how it can help us, like you were saying, promote limited government and small libertarian philosophy and principles without even having to elect people at all?
Well, I think it's a big thing, because I remember back before we had copy machines. I know I'm dating myself, but it's just a tremendous information flow. And you see, information is really the key, because most people don't have any other experience other than government providing services, for example. Well, I can remember back when AT&T had a monopoly, not just on local phone, but on long distance. And I remember I remember the big price drop, So what's good about all this is that people find out about these things sooner. In other words, it doesn't take us, we don't have to send a letter, which is what we used to have to do. We can exchange, have a whole conversation by email in one day. We can call each other up like we are now for nothing.
On the internet.
Yes, on the internet. So it's wonderful. So, information is the key. And that's what people haven't had before. What they haven't had is they haven't had a way to compare the market to government in a global way. And now that's available. In fact, if something happened to the U.S. right now, as long as the internet was maintained, it's pretty clear that the story of the United States, which is minimal government, at least it used to be, creating a lot of prosperity, will still be there. Same with Hong Kong. That information is out there. It's going to be hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And it's really the information exchange that technology makes possible. I think that is going to help educate people and help them understand that government only poses as their friend, while, really being the tool of the elite.
It was fascinating, because you look back when we had the government shutdown here to start off 2019, and I'm honestly convinced that the only reason the government ended up not continuing the shutdown was because they were worried that people were going to start to understand, like, hey, we haven't had this government thing for